So, as many of you have probably heard by now, Jujutsu Kaisen is coming to an end in the next 5 chapters. Gege Akutami has just recently released a statement stating, "The story will end in 5 more chapters. I am only able to end the story in the way I wanted to, thanks to the support and cooperation of all my readers. Thank you. I am working hard to create a final chapter that will probably satisfy as many people as possible who have supported Jujutsu Kaisen. So everyone, please bear with me." And the official ending date of Jujutsu Kaisen has been announced to be September 30th. So in just a little bit more than a month. And I'm not gonna lie, I am very disappointed to hear this. Not just because I'm a massive fan of Jujutsu Kaisen and I don't want to see the story end, but because you can't possibly wrap everything up in 5 chapters. That is way too little, and I'm very worried that this might go down as one of the biggest fumbles in manga history. It's honestly very clear that Gege Akutami has lost all motivation to actually write the story, and he just wants to wrap it up as soon as possible. And if I'm being honest, this has been very clear since the Gojo versus Sukuna fight, because this man has made every other fight besides Gojo versus Sukuna like 2 chapters long. I guarantee you some of those fights that we saw could have been way more than 2 chapters in order to flesh out the characters more and give them more time to shine. But it was obvious that Gege just wanted to finish up the story, and I'll get into more of that later. But let's think about all of the things that we're going to miss out on now because the story is ending in 5 chapters. The most obvious thing we are going to miss out on is the entirety of the Hikari versus Urame fight. We have not seen anything from this fight. I don't even think we've seen 10 pages of the fight in its entirety. So that entire fight is going to get cut off completely, and either we're going to see that they both died, that Urame won, or that Hikari won. Either way, their entire fight got completely off screen, because you cannot tell me that at least one of these chapters is going to be dedicated to Hikari versus Urame. It is definitely not. All 5 of these chapters are going to be dedicated to Yuji versus Sukuna. Because at this point, if we get Hikari versus Urame this late into the game, I'm sorry, but it'll just be a complete waste of a chapter. If we were gonna see Hikari versus Urame, we should have seen it in the very beginning of this fight, or at least in the midway point. We shouldn't see it at the very end. But I doubt we are ever going to see it at all. You know what I would have preferred? Instead of getting 5 chapters talking about Takabe versus Kenjaku and them doing like a whole comedy skit, I would have preferred that time to instead be dedicated to Hikari versus Urame, because I'm sure many more people care about Hikari than they do about Takaba. Hikari was literally introduced in season 1 of Jujutsu Kaisen and was hyped up to be one of the students that was capable of changing Jujutsu society along with Yuta and Yuji. And yet, he's only had one actual serious fight in the entire series, and that was up against Kashimo during the Cooling Games. Now, don't get me wrong, it was an amazing fight, and in fact, that's probably my second favorite fight in the entire series. But you cannot have a character that you hype up that much only have one fight in the series and not contribute at all in the final arc. And same applies to Urame. I mean, Urame has been hyped up to be like Sukuna's right-hand man. She is second to Sukuna. She is the only one Sukuna is willing to have as a loyal follower and servant. That goes to show that Urame is pretty strong, and yet we saw nothing of them. So Urame and Hikari go down as massive wasted potential as characters overall, because we barely got to see anything from either of them. With the series ending in 5 chapters, that also means Kenjaku is probably the most wasted villain in all of manga history, because a lot of people were theorizing for a Kenjaku comeback, or if it wasn't going to be a comeback, then it was going to be Kenjaku scheming something else in order to make the merger happen, but we didn't get that. Kenjaku was actually gone. His plan amounted to absolutely nothing. His whole 1,000-year scheme, it meant nothing in the end. He literally got bush camped by Yuta and got his head sliced off, and that was it for him. And people were saying that this was going to be the next Aizen. He amounted to nothing, and yet he was supposed to be the quote-unquote main villain of the series, right alongside with Sukuna, the guy who has planned everything out. Like, honestly, what was the point of Kenjaku's character? What did his actions amount to? Absolutely nothing. And if his actions were always going to amount to nothing, I would have at least loved to see a full-on brawl with Kenjaku and another character, like Yuta, for example. I would have rather see Yuta and Kenjaku go down than having Takaba go after Kenjaku. I feel like that was one of the biggest cop-outs ever, and it was just a way for Gege Akutami to wrap up Kenjaku's character as fast as possible. Because you cannot tell me you were satisfied with what they did with his character. He is genuinely the most wasted character I have ever seen. How can you introduce a character like Kenjaku, say that he's been scheming for thousands of years, say that he planned out the Shibuya incident, that he planned out the Cooling Games, that everyone is currently playing his game, and then defeat him just like that and do nothing with his character at all? And his actions have amounted to zilch. And speaking of Kenjaku's actions, we never got to see the merger. And if we see it in these next 5 chapters, then it's going to be done horribly because it'll be way too short to showcase. I was expecting the entire group to have to deal with Kenjaku's merger after Sukuna is defeated. I was expecting Kenjaku to have some sort of master plan just in case if Sukuna was defeated. But apparently that's not going to be the case by the looks of it. It would have been at least nice to see that Kenjaku's entire plan actually amounted to something and there are actual consequences to Kenjaku being around instead of him just planning everything and it doing nothing. The world building in Jujutsu Kaisen is also some of the worst I have ever seen because there is none. I realized that midway through the Cooling Games, we were never going to see any type of world building in Jujutsu Kaisen. And that's because Gege Akutami decided to cop out and say that Jujutsu sorcerers are rare outside of Japan. I mean, come on. You cannot tell me that isn't a cop out. The only reason he said that was so that he wouldn't have to deal with developing an outside world outside of Japan in Jujutsu Kaisen. Also, whatever happened with the United States finding out about Jujutsu sorcery? All we saw was soldiers infiltrating the Cooling Games for 1 chapter and that's it. The rest has never been mentioned since, and might I add, that was also one of Kenjaku's plans that was just forgotten about completely. Another thing I have to add is that Jujutsu Kaisen's side cast has to be one of the most wasted casts I have ever seen because the characters are all amazing, yet they barely get any chance to shine at all. And it is so sad to see. I already talked about Hikari, but honestly every character was wasted in this arc besides Yuji and Gojo. Kashimo was completely wasted, hyped up to be the strongest of his own era, yet he was around for 2 chapters. Higuruma was hyped up to be a prodigy that matched Gojo's talent, yet was absolutely decimated after like 2 chapters as well. Maki gets an awakening, says that she's equal to Toji, gets decimated by Sukuna in 2 chapters. We get to see Yuta's domain expansion, which amounts to nothing. Yuta takes over to Gojo's body, which amounts to nothing. He practically did 0 damage to Sukuna. And then Gege Akutami decides to sprinkle in these random characters that we don't really care about, like Miguel, Kusekabe, only for them to get eliminated after 1 chapter. So what was the point of these characters at all? Yuta and Maki, fine, I can understand. They got their chance to shine way before this final arc. But what about characters like Kashimo? Why even introduce him into the story if he's gonna amount to absolutely nothing and was going to get 1 shot right away? Honestly, it was in his fight where I realized that Gege Akutami really wants to get his story finished, because I guarantee you, almost every single one of those fights could have been 2-3 chapters longer, and it would have been so much more fulfilling to see. That whole cycle we got after the Gojo versus Sukuna fight, where a new character would appear, challenge Sukuna, and would get decimated in 2 chapters or less, was some of the most repetitive and boring writing I have ever seen. Because it was very clear at that point that Gege Akutami was just trying to wrap up the story as fast as possible and get to the Yuji and Sukuna fight. Like, I'm aware that we have 5 chapters to go and that we can't judge the story yet and that anything can happen in these 5 chapters, but I think it's very obvious that Gege Akutami cannot possibly wrap up every single thing at this point in just 5 chapters. Hikari versus Urame, if they do get shown, it's going to be a complete waste of a chapter at this point. Even if it's not a full chapter, it's going to be a waste of pages because at this point, nobody cares about Hikari versus Urame, but it's still disappointing that we never got to see it in the beginning or middle. And at this point, it is too late to even show it. Kenjaku goes down as the most wasted villain in all of anime. Like, I can't think of a bigger disappointment than Kenjaku. And many characters like Kashimo, Hikari, Yuki, all go down as wasted potential as well. Just think about it. Takuba got more screen time and got more of a role in this final arc than any of the characters I mentioned. Than actually most of the characters that were shown. So, honestly, I'm just disappointed. I feel like this entire final arc has been disappointing with the way it was written and with the repetitive challenger cycle thing that we were getting for so long. I don't know. I just don't feel right with this story ending in 5 chapters, and I was really hoping to see more. But anyways, I hope you all enjoyed the video, and make sure to like and subscribe, and let me know what video you guys want to see next. I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you guys on the next one.